There is something to be said about modern FPS games versus those of the late 90s to early 2000s. Many that grew up during that time will argue that those periods were golden for the FPS genre. Despite this, however, the massive rise of the Call of Duty series in the late 2000s would unfortunately make way for a mountain of generic shooters in an industry-wide attempt to poorly copy a quality formula. Obviously, not all games of that period were bad. Some gems definitely stand out amongst the rest for sure. Of course, that whole debate is for another video. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it's this yearning for old school FPS goodness that led me back to one of my favorite games from when I was a kid, Medal of Honor: Allied Assault. While the series may not be doing so great nowadays, Medal of Honor was once a very successful series, both critically and commercially. Initially getting its start on the PS1 with the original game and its sequel, Underground, Allied Assault would be the first game in the series to hit the PC. Despite the tons of titles that came after it, however, I still think Allied Assault has remained the best game in the franchise. There were plenty of other good games that came after, but this game in particular just strikes the right balance for me. In this video, I'll be covering Allied Assault to see how the game holds up today after all these years. So, let's get nostalgic. You play as Lieutenant Mike Powell. Initially a US Army Ranger, you go on to become an agent of the OSS, and throughout the game you will embark on various missions involving sabotage and espionage. You will head to various locations including North Africa, Norway, and Nazi-occupied France. While telling a fictional plot within the game itself, the game does a very good job of maintaining an overall authenticity to the time and setting. Before missions, you will follow briefings using real-life images from the Second World War. The locations you fight in, the weapons you use, and times mostly line up and helps the game progression feel just right. It's pretty old school plot progression, there are no cutscenes. As an OSS agent for most of the game, you'll frequently fight alone, and thus there isn't much in the way of memorable or recurring characters. This isn't an issue though, as this was never a focus of the game. The focus is on the missions themselves and making you feel like a war hero within Medal of Honor's interpretation of the World War II setting. It strikes a fine balance between being a fun video game plot without being disrespectful to the conflict and the events which occurred, unlike most World War II games that I've seen nowadays. To discuss the visuals, as you might expect, since this is a game from 2002, they are pretty dated. It's not god-awful, obviously, the visuals were solid for their time. Character models are mostly well detailed, with the only issue being how their textures massively drop off with distance. The weapons are also modeled fairly and are all recognizable to what they are supposed to represent. The environments are honestly where the game's age is most noticeable. The main thing I found myself noticing looking back through my footage is that typically whenever things are more linear and compact, the game features more detail. However, when the scale gets larger, landscapes can tend to get a bit barren. This is most noticeable when you compare, say, the first mission to that of Mission 3. The Omaha Beach section still looks alright, but the latter levels can look a bit bland. Not all of the levels are like this though. The snowy forests combined with the foggy draw distance actually makes for a very good atmosphere in Mission 6, and the sense of scale can actually feel really cool, like in the final section of Mission 5. I honestly can't hold too much against the visuals, seeing as the game turns 20 this year, or has turned 20 this year. It sits in that spot where it has aged a ton, but you can clearly see that the devs were definitely trying during their period, and there are some nice looking spots. Allied Assault to me has some of the most iconic sound design of any game I've ever played. I can't think of many other games where I can recognize the gun sound effects to their respective title. This is one of them. It's funny because on one hand, some of the weapons kinda sound very video gamey and not like real firearms at all. On the other hand though, you get stuff like the snipers, which sound absolutely fantastic. Regardless of which direction of sound design you prefer, they're both really well done in this game, and the guns just sound good to use across the board. The voice work in the game is also pretty solid. A lot of the American voice lines from certain missions, especially the MOHAA level, are probably never gonna escape my brain. Your commanding officer that reads your briefings before each mission also sounds suitably good and helps to hype you up.
As you may know, our primary advantage against the German U-boat threat lies in our ability to detect them with ship and airborne radar. Unfortunately, we've learned that the Kriegsmarine has developed a new piece of equipment, a kind of radar detector called the Naxos.
Of course, I can't talk about Medal of Honor without discussing the music. Out of all the World War II shooters you will find, none can match the soundtrack of the classic Medal of Honor games. The main theme on its own should be enough to sell it to you. Even if that somehow doesn't though, the tracks which play during the game are all very good, they are thematic and memorable. The music during the forest of Mission 6 in particular is guaranteed to haunt my dreams. Every single forest becomes a threat while this song is playing. It's great. I would go as far as to say Allied Assault basically created the classic World War II shooter template. It also probably does it the best. I've played the original COD games, and despite their initial attempts to keep this formula, they couldn't match this game in my opinion. While your objectives will remain fairly similar throughout the game, the level variety always keeps things fresh. You go on a rescue mission in North Africa, undercover in a Nazi base to destroy a U-boat and an anti-radar prototype, take part in the Omaha beach invasion, and more. Every mission feels completely different from the last, and this is what keeps this game so fun to this day in my opinion. It is a roller coaster, and that's including one mission in particular, which I will get to in a moment. You've got the classic fixed health bar with a health pack system. You can carry one weapon for each category, giving you plenty of tools to work with, and the weapon variety is very solid. Sadly, there isn't much in the way of enemy variety, but thankfully the gunplay mostly does all of the heavy lifting. Despite being a fairly PG game, sure there's Nazis but there's no blood, the shooting still feels very good. This is a combination of the sound design as well as the stagger mechanics in place. Enemies react pretty dynamically depending on where you hit them, and it just helps to make it all feel very satisfying. I seriously wish more games had these kinds of dynamic systems for enemies taking damage. Now, the shooting feels pretty good when you're actually hitting people, but it's not always consistent. Moving and shooting can be insanely inaccurate with certain weapons, but neither the game or your reticle will tell you this. You can run and gun with SMGs as much as you like, but at the end of the game, I found hitting enemies with the STG-44 in particular to be absolutely maddening. It's not constant, but there definitely were moments where I had my crosshair dead on an enemy and I just straight up missed them entirely. Now, there are 6 missions total in the main campaign. Each mission will consist of multiple separate levels, which usually serve the purpose of changing the pace as well as probably maintaining performance by not making the areas too large. Each mission is typically 30 to 40 minutes long, with the exception of Mission 6, the last one. I would say most of the missions are about on par in quality with the exception of Mission 5. It's basically a legend amongst the veterans of this game that the first level of Mission 5, Sniper's Last Stand, is complete and utter horse shit. I do agree with this statement, and I do heavily dislike this level, but for me, it's not just this section. Personally, I just highly dislike Mission 5 in general, and if I do ever replay Allied Assault again, I will have no qualms with just skipping Mission 5 entirely. The first level is a trial and error fest where you gotta play Where's Waldo with probably a couple dozen snipers that basically never miss and fire much faster than you do. Following this, you play a tank section. This should be fun, the destruction is nice and there's plenty to fight. However, it's kinda ruined by the tank cannon having 0 blast radius, meaning enemies right next to it can just take no damage. I even had one instance where my shell just straight up disappeared. The final level of Mission 5 is comparable for the most part, that is until you reach the last section. It's all fine until the other tanks show up. The game expects and asks of you to use your binoculars so that you can direct your air support to take out the enemy tanks. The issue is that the air support straight up didn't even work for me most of the time, and when it did, it was way too slow to have any kind of massive impact. It just feels underdeveloped. Now, that all being said, it's really the only part of the game that I genuinely hate with a passion. There are some minor things I could complain about, but I would really just be nitpicking. Aside from Mission 5 and some artificial moments of difficulty in the last 2 missions in particular, the base game of Allied Assault is still really great. Its solid gunplay, mission variety, classic sound design, and music help this game stand the test of time to this very day. I still love this game just as much now as I did when I was a kid. Believe it or not, I was planning on covering both of the expansions in this video as well. I played through the entirety of Spearhead and got quite some way through Breakthrough before Breakthrough in particular decided to completely break on me. After all the minor technical hiccups I pushed through just to get this game running in the first place on my modern computer, by this point I'd just lost motivation to keep going. The Spearhead expansion is only short, taking me around 2 hours to get through its 3 new missions, but it is mostly a good time. Breakthrough is solid for what it is, but combined with Spearhead, I do have some issues with the expansions as a whole. Both games, for some reason, had the exact same annoying visual bug related to the draw distance, which made multiple levels look really bad. Both games are also significantly more stingy with ammo and health pickups from what I noticed, leading to these expansions feeling a lot more difficult and not in a good way in my opinion. Unlike in the base game of Allied Assault, which tended to have long sections with no checkpoints, leading to frustration, the expansions do this with pickups instead. Repeatedly I'd find myself in these insanely annoying situations, being forced to rely on quick saves to get by because the game would go 10 minutes straight fighting dozens of enemies without any health items in between. Make no mistake, there are some improvements here. There are a bunch of new weapons to use from the different countries. Much of the artillery and anti-air weapons can now be mounted, despite how unrealistic it actually is for you to solo some of these. In general, there are a bit more large-scale war sections, despite them being a bit neutered by the draw distance issue I mentioned. If you enjoy the main game, I'd say the expansions are definitely worth a try, but I still don't think they hold a candle to the base game. Still solid though. To sum it all up, I still love Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Its expansions may not hold up to it for me personally, and naturally it has aged considerably. Despite this, it's still the best Medal of Honor game to me, and an FPS classic. Its atmosphere, shooting mechanics, and varied missions still invest me to this day. You can pick up the Allied Assault War Chest and some of the other Medal of Honor games on GOG. If you're at all interested in revisiting the series, or even trying for the first time, you can do so there. Just be mindful of the potential headaches of running Allied Assault on modern systems. This is also a personal note, the Fear 3 video is going to be delayed due to some personal issues, so might be 2 to 4 weeks before that video actually comes to fruition. So if you are someone who's waiting for that, thank you for being patient. I'll get onto that as soon as I can. Alright, thanks for watching, and bye.